The shadow is ruled through love on today's Oblyron spirituality. Greetings everyone, I am Oblyron, Lord of the Underworld and consort to the most lovely Hecate. Thank you for joining me on today's episode where we are going to talk about how, with the shadow being extensions of God's consciousness, it is ultimately ruled by love and the consciousness of God. So when I claimed my underworld throne, I thought that since my higher self was an archetype of ultimate destruction, that perhaps I ruled it through fear, that I ruled it with, let's say, a Machiavellian attitude and with an iron fist and all that. And I thought that Hecate was my divine consort out of fear. And she said, no, I rule through love. And that always stuck with me, because you think, wow, it's the underworld. Isn't it supposed to be the darkness? Isn't it supposed to, even in the prison layer, isn't it supposed to be hell to imprison spirits and all this kind of stuff? But the reality is that if I were to allow my destructive side to take over, and if I were to rule it through fear and through anger and through, let's say, sin or whatever you want to call it, then there would be nothing left. Everything would be destroyed. And if you go back and you look at my video, We Belong to the Body of God, I talk about how everything is interconnected and we ultimately are all on the same team because we all ultimately belong to the body of God. And if we also believe that technology is infinite and our destructive powers are infinite, then it means that there are also destructive capabilities out there to unravel all of creation right now. And that is very true, but we are still here. So it means that ultimately, even though there exists a technology to destroy in unspeakable terms, there exists the ability to unravel creation right now, the fact that we are still here means that those technologies and those abilities are not employed, because ultimately it all comes down to love. Ultimately it all comes down to us belonging to the body of God. And if we were to recklessly use these technologies without consideration, and we have the ability to act out of our emotional states, then again it would all come crashing down. It would all come to an end. And that's when everything made sense. Yeah, it exists, but it's not employed. And when you realize that you do possess those types of destructive capabilities, you hope that you never have to use them. And so there really does begin to develop an enlightened, I guess you could say, sort of awareness or consciousness, because you possess that power. Again, as above, so below, as within, so without. We have the ability to annihilate our planet right now through nuclear warfare, but so far we haven't. And I believe that we will not, because ultimately our love and our appreciation for one another will override whatever differences we have. And that is also how my higher self rules the underworld. Now, we have a tendency to vilify the shadow. We have a tendency to view it as lower vibrational, all these sorts of things. However, in my personal working with the shadow, it reminds me a lot of the little boy from The Sixth Sense. When he had his psychic gifts, he was initially very afraid of all the ghosts that would come to him because they would be scary. They would, they would be disfigured. They would They would seem rather intimidating to him. And as the movie went on, and as he began to really reconcile with his abilities, he began to actually be a guide towards them. He was able to see them for who they are. He was able to see past their scars. He was able to basically treat them and accept them with love. And that has also been my personal experience. For example, just the other week, I was woken up at around 4 a.m. to this dark, spider-like apparition, which was clinging to the ceiling in the corner of my room. And it was staring down at me kind of menacingly. And I looked at it and I said, why are you here? And she said, I wanted to see you. And I said, why are you looking at me kind of menacingly like that? And she said, I wanted to make sure you were who you were. And then I said, okay, are you satisfied with that? And she said, yes. Can I stay here the night to protect you, my lord? And I said, yeah, that's fine. Just don't disturb my dreams again. And then I rolled over and went back to sleep. When you work with the shadow and you start to attract the beams of the darkness, it's nothing to really be afraid of. You know, we are taught that these entities are evil. We are taught that, you know, a lot of these entities, they just want to hurt us. And a lot of how they treat us is also how we treat them. Or like, let's say even when you run across like a dog or something. You know, a dog may bark at you, it may feel scary, but if you know how to approach the dog, if you know how to handle the dog, then all of a sudden that dog becomes submissive. It's the same thing with people. You know, we may run across people that may seem intimidating, especially, you know, in the past. You know, a lot of people were definitely far more judgmental of a lot of other people, and you know, they were scared of how other people dressed. They were scared of how other people look like. And so, you know, there was a lot of animosity thrown back and forth between people in that manner. And, you know, as long as we view that separation, as long as we view, you know, we go in with our prejudices or we go in with our discrimination and whatnot, we will elicit those responses. We will, you know, experience those things which could actually want to harm us because really of how we responded to them. I mean, even if you look at a lot of the older videos that I recorded, especially the demons can possess the chakras, I had a lot of things to say about them when I had not integrated my shadow. And nowadays I have a completely different perspective. Nowadays I realize that a lot of those primevals, a lot of those forces, they aren't these external forces. They aren't these abstract entities that exist in the ether, or, you know, they exist only in hell or whatever. They are archetypes that exist within myself, and they are archetypes that exist within all of us. And when you view it from that kind of perspective, it's far more of an enlightening and liberating experience, because you can understand yourself excuse me, in your entirety. There's no longer a separation. It doesn't mean that, you know, we go out and we act these things and we become these things in public or any of that. It doesn't mean any of that. But by recognizing it and realizing it realizing that these forces are within us, realizing that we are also capable of evil, and it's not, just this person that we point a finger at, or this, demon that we point a finger at. It allows us to take accountability completely for our actions. Even in the I was possessed by Satan video that I posted as well, it wasn't a possession. It was really my own unconscious mind. It was really my own wrath surfacing and being expressed and coming out. And you can't point the finger at an abstract entity. And I think the reason why we choose to create these figures and say that they're not within us is because, to realize that it is within us, it's such a sobering and it's such a hard perspective to really digest. So many times we like to think that we are the heroes of our own story. So many times we like to think that we are the virtuous ones, when in fact, many times we aren't. Many times, from someone else's perspective, we are actually quite evil. And a lot of times, too, it's almost like the more that we do try to do, the more that we do try and achieve, the more toes we're going to step on, and the more that we could, from many people's perspectives, be considered the villain in another person's story. That's a very sobering fact. And going in with that perspective, as I've gone through my own life and realized these things, I began to see with clarity just how I was the villain, how I was capable of horrible things and horrendous things, and I felt at the time completely justified in my actions. And when you realize things like that too, you start to also go back and look at history from a completely different perspective. You start to look at the actions being taken throughout times of war. You start to take a look at the actions of, also other things that people have done throughout history that were completely horrendous in what they've done to other people. And, even from their perspective, they felt completely justified in what they did. And so, again, it's not, when you truly decide to integrate that shadow, it's not about becoming evil. It's not about doing things for evil's sake, or going on and causing pain to others. It's realizing in that moment how you are causing pain to others. I mean, that's really the bottom line. In real time, you can catch yourself when you are being the villain. You can catch yourself when you are doing those things that you may have never even recognized before. And so, the more we get into that practice, and the more we realize that within ourselves, well, yeah, when we start to come across these other entities, these interdimensional entities, we view them with less judgment. It's really easy to say, oh, well, the archons are evil, the Anunnaki are evil, demons are evil, but really, post-shadow integration, I look at a lot of these sort of light worker videos, and I also look at my own videos too, and how one-sided I was and how one-sided they are. And it really does a mental number on you, because you can see the shadow within them, and they don't see it within themselves. Okay? I could see in my old videos the shadow, just right behind my eyes that I was completely ignorant to. And here I am making all these videos and, getting all these responses from people. And, I'm very glad to have gone what I've gone through, because now I can see it from a different perspective. I can see it from a perspective of perfect clarity. And there were some comments back then that tried to warn me, that tried to tell me those types of things. And back then I even tried to understand it too, but I didn't understand it to the point to which I understand it today. And yeah, that's a real blessing to be able to do that. So it's really about getting to a point to where you view things without preference and without prejudice. It's really getting to the point to where you can just see things as they are, and not cast judgment on it, not go in with your own set of values or expectations or any of that kind of stuff. Just be the observer. Just view it again for what it is, and to also just accept it for what it is too. Things develop for a reason, and everything has its place and its purpose. So I'm going to leave it there for today. I hope that this helps someone out, and if you resonate with this message, then please leave a like, subscribe, or a comment, and let us all know how you resonated with it. And again, thank you again for joining us, and love and light and wisdom and shadow. And now we shall close with a chant of Oblyron. Amde sote, amde Oblyron, amde sote, amde Oblyron.